We are slaying monsters.
Don't let the ghosts and the ghouls disturb you, darling.
Every time I'm like, oh wow, a meteor, cool, I don't care that much, and I forget, and then it happens. And then I'm like, oh, well, for this episode, I want to just mention that the cult leader dragon is going through the earth, like going by the earth, and we need to mention it, but it already happened. So I'm a terrible cult leader because I can't remember when my own magical dragon is passing across.
You're talking about the
atmosphere.
The Mother of Dragons comet, or
Yes.
the Devil's comet.
Yeah.
Devil comet, yeah.
Apparently it already happened, so I suck.
Yeah, there's this is what Live Science.
Mm-hmm.
See the explosive Devil comet get its tail ripped off by a solar storm.
I don't know, man. It's an intangible. I think that's my problem. You know,
Space?
Yeah, it's like, okay, like I'll go watch a light go across the sky. I can't do anything with it. It's just like there.
Yeah.
So I forget. I don't care. I care about the things that are in front of me.
You look at the eclipse and it's like, oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, cool. Okay, that happened. It has no bearing on my life. It means absolutely nothing to me, really. It's just something that happens.
There were a bunch of people that thought that like crazy shit was going to happen during the eclipse. Like, I don't know.
Who knows? Name your thing. But like everybody does that. Everybody comes up with something during an event.
Oh, yeah.
So.
Yeah, and nothing catastrophic happened.
No, nothing. Never. Ever does.
By the way, did you see? I didn't think about talking about this, but apparently they've been seeing Mothman in Chicago.
No.
Did you see that at all? Yeah.
No.
Yeah. Recently. Yeah, I can't. I don't know. I saw it on Reddit, so it's hard to say. Reddit's such a weird place because like sometimes there's worthwhile stuff on there, and then sometimes it's like I saw this really weird thing at one point and whatever. But yeah, apparently some people have been seeing Mothman in Chicago.
Okay. Well, it was probably an owl.
I think Mothman is going to be one of the guest stars on season 3 of The Bear because they're filming right now. He probably works with Chef Terry, the Olivia Colman chef.
Oh, yeah.
He's probably working at that restaurant.
She's
Mothman.
the best.
Yeah. Employed Mothman.
Definitely.
So watch for the Mothman cameo, The Bear, season 3.
It's going to be a weird turn. We are slaying monsters. Across the table, we've got Matt.
Yo.
And I'm EJ. And we got some April Roundup going on
it's
up
time,
in this bitch.
Time for another Fortean Roundup here in April. We had some very unique news items. I feel like a lot of these are going to be about conspiracies, actually, which is kind of interesting. Conspiracies and a lot of pseudoscience.
What you got first?
Well, first off, I just want to acknowledge this just happened at the time of our recording. There was a special on John Oliver's Last Week Tonight where he talked at length about, it was actually the featured segment, he talked about UAPs, UFOs, and I think he did a tremendous job. I watched it over my lunch as I was compiling my notes for this episode. I think he killed it. Like, I agree with all of the things that he was saying, and I think that he brings up, again, the very important point that people are seeing something and people want answers, and what they don't want is either to be told that they're crazy or to be lumped in with tinfoil hat people who go to like extreme lengths to talk to you about all the like crazy end of the world shit, or interdimensional Bigfoots flying in on spaceships and all of that shit, right? There's a lot of people who are just like, I want an answer to what is actually going on, and maybe even, hey, I think the government has not been completely clear with us, and it would be nice to know what's like in our skies, domestic and foreign, not even necessarily interstellar. And so I think that that's wonderful. I think it's important. I love that he brought up Robert Bigelow, who is something of a thorn in our side here at Slaying Monsters, because Robert Bigelow has a tendency to misappropriate taxpayer money and use it to study really just insane, loony shit ghosts and afterlife and all kinds of, like, they were tunneling through the moon was one of the programs that he talked about on Last Week Tonight, and just like weird ass shit. And then the wormhole, or wormhole through space and time so you could look at a dinosaur. Like, that kind of stuff is where American taxpayer dollars are going. They're not going to, hey, we saw a legitimate craft in the sky, let's try to figure out what that is and get some real reporting back. Or say, hey, there's a whole bunch of dollars that have gone missing and we don't know where they are, but there's a lot of black budget programs out there that are just gobbling up all of those taxpayer dollars.
And I want to push back and say I don't think Bigelow is misappropriating anything. I think that the politician who sent him the money is misappropriating.
Oh, I guess Bigelow is actually appropriating. He's doing exactly what he's being paid to do.
He's doing exactly what he's supposed to be doing.
Yeah, he is. Now Bigelow is doing exactly what Bigelow does.
So the people that we should be really mad at are the politicians that are throwing all of our hard-earned money to this guy.
Well, I'm going to push back on that. I can still be mad at Robert Bigelow.
Oh, you can totally be mad at Robert Bigelow, but I think we need to remember the voting, how important that is.
Yes,
and
yeah.
who we want to put in office.
Absolutely. But if Robert Bigelow wasn't there, I mean, I guess maybe somebody else would be there anyway. I don't know. I just don't like when there are people who have loony theories and they have the funds and the means to be able to do something with them, and then it turns out that they're not even really doing legitimate research. You have to start raising questions around that. They're not publishing a whole lot of papers. Like, there's not a lot coming out of there, but they have a TV show.
Yeah.
You know, like, there's some shit is up here. And it just seems like, you know how in film, sometimes movies get made, not to call out my own industry, but like sometimes movies get made because somebody needs to have a place to put some money. Not necessarily because a movie like really is a great topic or a great script or something like that, but it's more like, hey, all of these dollars just landed in my account and they need to go somewhere before the government starts asking questions. Let's make a movie with them.
Right.
Like, yeah, I feel like we have to be very skeptical about these types of pseudoscientific programs, especially when they're not yielding anything, especially when they're tied to somebody as shady as Robert Bigelow.
Yeah.
So speaking of, and we'll just touch on it real briefly as a news topic, but speaking of exactly this type of charlatan, Jaime Maussan showed bodies again, and the Minister of Culture showed up and tried to get the bodies from him, but he didn't actually have the bodies at the briefing and all of that. But nothing new has happened with it. He's still fucking Jaime Maussan doing exactly Jaime Maussan things, and the bodies are still not aliens. They have not been aliens. They're not going to be aliens. They've not been aliens for well over a decade as he's been doing this. So. Whatever. Yeah,
there's really not much to say there.
No, there's nothing. There's nothing to say about that. Like, he's still doing his thing. So you know. Yeah. But EJ, where do you want to start here? So we have a couple of stories. We have the anomaly. We have the let's see.
Let's do the anomaly.
The anomaly.
Yeah, let's just start there.
Okay. Yeah, we can start there. So yeah. This really briefly hit the news. There was a large cluster of waves that were spotted moving off the coast of Africa on April 10th. And that was all reported by a program called Ventusky, or Ventusky. It might be Ventusky because it's meteorological, Ventusky. It's a meteorological app, and what it does is it collates real-time data of like wind and wave patterns, and then uses all of that to create an interactive interface on its app. And that data can come from all kinds of sources. Among them are the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration here in the US. And they caught something really weird. It was this gigantic oblong shape. It looks kind of like a football, 2,000 miles long and 1,500 miles wide. Reports were calling this object bigger than Texas. Now, I mean, I don't really know why Texas is our rubric for the size of that object, but we have to assume that if that anomaly was located in Texas, it would be even larger because everything is larger in Texas.
That's right. I think just because Texas is a large state and we like to,
Alaska's bigger than Texas, though. Why isn't it bigger than Alaska?
It doesn't have that ring to it. I want to say bigger than 100 Rhode Islands.
Well, I don't
want to
even
say that.
Bigger than 100 Rhode Islands?
Yeah, because Rhode Island's a really small state, and I think it'd be fun to be like, it's bigger than about, 78 Rhode Islands.
Can you fit a number of Rhode Islands inside Texas?
Probably.
I mean, I'm sure you can fit some. I don't know. How many Rhode Islands equal one Texas?
I don't know how exciting this is for our listeners to figure out, to listen to, but...
Rhode Island is so small that it can fit into the state of Texas 221 times.
There you go.
But this was even bigger than that, so even more than 221 Rhode Islands.
Amazing. Wow.
There you go. No, I actually, so I don't know how big Texas is. I don't know how big Rhode Island is. Mm-hmm. So I thought our listeners would appreciate a calculation that they can really envision themselves. Now, we've done a little bit with this before, but I feel like there is a very appropriate NFL quarterback and conspiracy theorist in Aaron Rodgers, who I feel like we should use as our measuring rubric.
Okay.
Because Aaron Rodgers, not only, he's a Super Bowl winning quarterback, used to play for the Green Bay Packers, now plays for the New York Jets. He's an interesting guy when it comes to what he believes. It started when he was just a little bit on the fence about COVID, and it sort of spiraled into him believing that the U.S. government actually created AIDS and released... Did you see this?
No.
Yeah, so he came out recently within the last couple of weeks and said that he believes that the U.S. government created and released AIDS in the 1980s, and I don't know why. Which is kind of fascinating because we have cases of AIDS that date all the way back to the 1960s, and there's generally like a 10-year incubation period for AIDS. So it would have been, the infections would have happened in the 1950s, but he's positive that it was invented by the government in the 1980s.
Okay, well, he knows best.
But anyway, so if you lay conspiracy theorist Aaron Rodgers foot to head, you could fit 1.7 million Aaron Rodgers inside this anomaly.
Amazing. That's amazing.
See, that's a good rubric for me. 1.7 million Aaron Rodgers all talking at you about AIDS.
Amazing. Well, that's not something I would pick.
Horrifying.
Yeah, I would not want that in my life. Although I am really upset about this because I like Aaron Rodgers a lot.
He was a great Jeopardy host.
He was the best. Okay.
And it's terrible.
He was the best, and
really
I will fight anybody on this because he had the charisma. He has that handsome... Oh, he's so handsome.
Well, it's such a shame, man, because I remember he studied Alex. He watched tapes the same way he watches tapes for games to study how he performs and how other quarterbacks perform. He watched the way Alex Trebek dealt with them and his cadence and his response time and all of that stuff, and he had it down. He was perfect, but he's also nuts.
It makes me so sad. Yeah. I loved him. I like Ken Jennings too, but I really thought that Aaron Rodgers had that amazing... He just had that je ne sais quoi, you know?
So this gigantic anomaly was visible on the data that's the data of Ventus Sky for about 24 hours before it disappeared. And that left a lot of people on social media platforms trying to figure out just what the heck it was. So some people suggested that it was some kind of undersea creature, some giant creature, because it seemed like it was moving through the water, like a kraken or something like that. Of course, people kind of tongue-in-cheek said Cthulhu, the elder god of Lovecraftian lore. But then there was also people who were suggesting that it might be an unidentified submarine object or USO. We haven't really talked about USOs before, but this is one of those really fascinating sidelines that you have in UFO UAP research. I know you know a little bit about these guys.
A little bit, although when you first said USO to me, I was like, the USO show?
Oh, with Bob Hope?
Confused. Yes. I was like, where are we going with this? I'm deeply confused.
I think you could fit even more Bob Hopes
probably
inside the anomaly.
Do they still do USO shows?
I have no idea.
Oh, interesting. Anyway, no.
Why would I know that?
I don't know. You just know things. So I didn't know about USOs before. Why would I know about that?
I mean,
I don't know.
Currently, Jack Dyer Crouch II is the CEO and has been the CEO since 2014 of the USO. So, yeah, I mean, I guess they're still doing it. Oh, it's the first result on Google. Do they still do USO tours?
Whatever.
I think they do.
Okay.
Yes, I think they do. Proponents of the USO UFO connection point to sightings like those from Christopher Columbus, who allegedly saw in 1492, as he was headed to America, lights over the ocean. And he wrote in his journal, "It resembled a small wax candle that rose and lifted up, which for a few seconds seemed to be an indication of land." So he actually saw a light rise over the water.
Okay. So he thought it was land that he was seeing.
Yeah, like
a lighthouse.
Like a lighthouse, yeah.
Of some
yeah,
sort.
That's kind of what he thought. Obviously, there was no land there. It's pretty much assumed that he saw a meteorite at this point, probably a meteorite breaking up in the atmosphere.
Cool. Yeah.
But beyond Columbus, I don't think you can talk about underwater UFOs without talking about the Shag Harbor incident. Do you know anything about the Shag Harbor incident?
Nope.
The Shag Harbor incident, they call it Canada's Roswell. And it was a widely reported crash of something in the Atlantic Ocean just off the coast of Nova Scotia. So it goes like this. On October 4th, 1967, there were a bunch of people in Shag Harbor and the surrounding area that reported seeing lights or objects in the sky. And they were moving in a linear pattern, these lights. So you had, a line of several of them before they descended to the ocean. And some people even reported that they heard a whistle, like if you had a grenade or something that you threw up in the air. I can't whistle, but you get the idea, right?
Yeah.
And at least one of the lights, when it hit the water, actually floated on the water before either sinking or going out. So immediately the Coast Guard and civilians with boats mobilized because they figured that a plane had crashed. I mean, they were looking for survivors. Mm-hmm. But what's weird is that despite their exhaustive search, they couldn't find an aircraft or they couldn't find debris at all.
Wow. What do you think it was?
There's some theories, but I don't know definitively what it was.
What's the theory? What are the theories?
Well, they behave a lot like flares. They rise up into the air, they hover slightly before falling into the water and then floating. They also kind of match Columbus's meteorite sighting, particularly if you're talking about a meteorite that broke up and maybe broke up into several pieces. I don't know if a meteorite would float on the surface of the water, but if they were fiery, I could see it taking a second for it to become extinguished and have the ocean still be bright from that before it sinks.
Yeah, sure.
This all kind of got sensationalized in the 1990s once the X-Files came into vogue. Mm. And there was a researcher who's named Chris Stiles, and he wrote a book in 2001 titled Dark Object, the World's Only Government-Documented UFO Crash. And he claimed that the lights, whatever they were, landed and connected with an underwater vehicle of some kind. Brian Dunning of Skeptoid points out that Stiles offers no supporting evidence for that claim at all, and generously calls his assumption, quote, a creative addition to the story invented a quarter century later.
Yeah. It seems to me like the most obvious answer is likely like a meteorite of some kind.
But I will say, I found as I was researching it, an unsubstantiated report. Divers searching for survivors spotted a craft under the water. Like they actually did. Do you want to guess what they saw under the water? Was
it like a boat?
It was a Russian submarine.
Oh, wow.
So we're talking about the 1960s, 1967. It's not out of the question that the incident could have been a failed test flight or a recovery attempt gone awry. And it's certainly not out of the realm of possibilities that the Russians were scouting the area. The U.S. was maintaining a military presence in Nova Scotia at the time. And it's really interesting because they were doing so under the guise of having a research station there.
Oh, why would they hide that?
Because it's the Cold War.
Okay. I guess that would be construed as escalation if somebody were to find out that they had an actual...
Well, and also you don't want to announce all the places where you have a military presence. Like, that's sort of the point. You know, if you do that, every single one becomes some kind of target.
Well, it seems like the Russians found out anyway.
Yeah, well, maybe, right? Yeah. If the Russians were there. Again, like, that's an unsubstantiated report. Right. I read it, but I couldn't find anything that actually backed it up. But it's possible.
That does make some sense, though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to this day, whatever actually happened in Shag Harbor, it's a mystery. Mm. It's a really weird kind of footnote in UFO history with aliens, submarines, all that stuff.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Do they have the same kitschy setup that they do in Roswell and Shag Harbor?
If you look at Shag Harbor, it's all about the crash.
Is it really?
That is what they are known for.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Now I want to go.
Yeah, I don't know if they have a museum, but yeah, they have like signs that point to this is where the crash was and all of that stuff. And yeah,
that's cool.
Yeah, their main page on their website is all like, oh, the Shag Harbor UFO incident. Yeah, it's. I mean, to be honest, like they're not really known for anything else, so that's what it is. Roswell's the same way. It's not known for anything except the Roswell crash.
Right.
Now, as for our gigantic undersea anomaly off Africa, turns out that was actually very quickly identified. Ventusky reported that the object was nothing more than a data error. Spokesperson David Prantle said, Ventusky serves as a visualization platform that collects data from various sources. The model receives millions of data points from ships and buoys throughout the ocean. Problems can occur in such large data sets. No undersea monster, gigantic alien submarine, just an error that was very quickly resolved.
But somehow it got out and made everybody really excited.
Yeah, I mean, things spread now in a way that they never did before.
Yeah, it kind of makes me wonder how often this does happen with all the aggregated data that they do collect. How often do they see these anomalies? And like maybe this one was a particularly huge one and they were like, oh, we've got to somebody's got to leak this and make it look cool.
Well, there's also a whole bunch of people who like scour Google Earth looking for crafts and things like that. There's people who scour Google Earth looking for Nessie because you're taking satellite photos of Loch Ness.
And isn't it always happening? Are the photos always happening to some extent? Or
they're always updated.
They're being updated.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Not like every minute, but yeah, every year or every couple of years they Google updates. Yeah.
Okay. The more that we have all of this data constantly being pushed out, it just makes me think more and more that it's probably not out there. You know, like we've got so many cameras at everything at this point.
We've been talking recently about that, just you and I, about Bigfoot and how you have all of these trap cams. There's so many trap cams and trail cams all over the place. And you're talking government ones on, you know, like national park land, stuff like that. Tons of private ones. You have ones from hunters. You have people who are just kind of interested in what's going on their land. We have one here. You would think if there were Sasquatches out there prevalent, they would be all over these cameras.
Yeah.
But what happens is it gets explained away because people say, oh, the Sasquatch is smart enough to avoid the cameras.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, I guess anything can get explained away as much as you want it to be.
It's one of the things that frustrates me is that the goalpost keeps moving. Yeah. Because why would they have any idea what the cameras are and why would they know to avoid them? It just doesn't make sense.
Right.
We have all of these habitats that are being endangered and threatened through climate change or through deforestation and all of that stuff. And you would think, I mean, we're seeing animals that normally wouldn't be seen. We had reports of last year, what was there? There was a wolverine, I think, that we thought
yeah.
had been extinct in the Pacific Northwest, but there were reports of it coming out again. You know, these animals that aren't normally interacting with humans are now interacting with humans because their habitats are being threatened. Why are we not threatening Bigfoot's habitats? It just doesn't make sense.
Yep.
Question, do you have questions about our gigantic anomaly that wasn't an anomaly?
I'm sure that no matter what people say that it actually truly was,
yes,
it doesn't matter because there are going to be people that believe that it was something.
I think that it was quick enough. It was sort of a blip in the timeline. I guess time will tell. What'll be interesting, because right now it seems like it's just overdone, resolved. Nobody's talking about it anymore. It'll be interesting to see in 2 years, 5 years, if it starts cropping up again and people start saying, oh, what was that? And then we have to go back through the whole process again and say, well, we actually know exactly what that was. Especially because it's not a sexy solution. A data error is not sexy.
And if you're conspiracy minded or if you're super curious about things like that, you're not going to be satisfied with that.
Well, we're gonna continue talking about conspiracies basically anywhere we go here. So, where do you want to go next?
What do we have? Let's do Bennet Braun.
Yeah, well, so conspiracy. I mean, I don't know that you necessarily call this next story a conspiracy.
It was, though, at one point.
It was, and it spawned other conspiracies. So maybe we can kind of lump it in there. The world has lost another asshole. We're going to talk about Bennet Braun. Now, Bennet Braun was an ex-psychiatrist who lost his license in 2 separate states, and he died on March 20th. Braun was a huge proponent of repressed memories and multiple personality disorder, both which were very questionable fields of study. But we're going to talk about it specifically because I think Slaying Monsters has an interest in his contributions to the Satanic Panic of the 1980s, which was a complete sham of a claim that there were like secret satanic cults committing ritual child abuse in daycares and schools all over the country. That's what they believed.
This put innocent people in jail. It ruined lives.
Oh yeah, this ruined all kinds of lives.
People died because of it.
Yeah, this goes back to the McMartin preschool trials, which we talked about in our Fox Sisters episode, where you have kids, and the problem with kids and trying to do interviews with children, and we've learned this in the intervening years, is that kids, they understand how to please adults and what adults are looking for when they have conversations with them. That's just, they have to, because the kid has no other power in an argument or conversation. All they can do is satisfy the adult. And so when you have an adult who sits down with you and says, were there ever people who came in and lit candles and did chants?
You would say no.
Right. And then the adult says, are you sure? That never happened?
Well, maybe.
So they did light candles sometimes.
Yeah.
And they did do chants.
Yeah.
And then you see the adult get all excited and he says, oh, wow. So what else did they do? And then the kid can just run with it. That's what it is. And it was such a fucked up scenario, and so much bad science and pseudoscience surrounded this whole thing. Bennet Braun's grubby little fingerprints are all over the book that started this whole fiasco, called Michelle Remembers. Now that book itself was written by Michelle Smith and her psychiatrist, Lawrence Pazder. Pazder, another total jackass, used hypnosis and recovered memory therapy on Michelle Smith. And because he was a crank, he didn't recover any memories from her at all. Because you can't actually recover memories the way that he thought you could. It's not real.
We're not hard drives?
No, we're not hard. That's what he thought, though. That's literally the approach he took, was like, oh, some of the data's corrupted in there. All I have to do is run this program and then it's going to come back. What he ended up doing was actually implanting false memories of ritualistic abuse in Smith and making her think that they were her actual memories. He convinced her that she was part of a satanic cult doing terrible things. Like she was sexually abusing children, or she was forcing them into prostitution.
Wow. Meanwhile, there are actual real people that are doing this stuff.
Yeah,
and not getting
that's the awful part of it, is that they're actually diverting attention away from people who really are in danger and who really need to have investigations done because they are being abused. We're not talking about them. We're talking about the Satanists who don't even exist.
By the way, they're never Satanists.
No, they're never Satanists. Do you know why they're Satanists? Do you know why they were Satanists?
Why did he choose Satanists?
Yeah.
I don't know,
Pastor,
actually.
Why he did.
Oh, Pastor, I don't know.
He was a devout Catholic. It fit that narrative.
Sure.
Now, devout Catholic or not, he went on to marry Michelle Smith. His patient, remember, he's a psychiatrist. He married his patient. That's problematic.
Just a little.
By the late 1980s, he spent the majority of his time investigating satanic abuse cases.
Yeah, and like kids were outing their parents for things that they didn't even do.
Yeah.
People went to jail.
Yes, they did.
Over complete lies.
Yeah. I know we had this conversation when we talked about the Fox Sisters episode, but it's worth bringing up again that when I was in preschool, and now I was in preschool in, 1988, 89-ish, I told my teachers or whoever they were, that my mom threw me against a wall. And it wasn't true. It wasn't true. But she probably joked about it at some point, and they probably saw a bruise or something on me. And they called my mom in. And they had a whole interview with her. And luckily, my teachers understood that I was an imaginative child. And they knew my mom well enough to be like, just so you know, he's telling these stories. It's not real and legitimate. But that's the kind of shit that was going on.
And, in the wrong hands, that would have landed your mom in a lot of trouble.
Totally, yeah. A real psychology professor, Richard McNally from Harvard, he had this to say of recovered memory therapy, this whole practice of sitting down with children and adults and trying to get those memories that they have locked away inside their brains that you can access with the right kind of therapy or hypnosis. He said, "It is the worst catastrophe to befall the mental health field since the lobotomy era."
Oh my God.
It's not real. You can't fucking do this.
And it's such a waste of time.
Yes.
Because you could be healing yourself.
You could.
Like, you're definitely, there's something going on with you. Like, why else would you sit down in front of somebody for help?
Well, and that's the thing, like you go to a therapist because you're looking for a solution.
You're already vulnerable. Yeah, and you want help, and you're not going to get help. You're going to get the opposite of help, and it's going to take you years and years longer to get any kind of benefit.
Right.
Well, you're not going to get any benefit from them, but you're not getting the help you need in the time that you need.
Yes.
And so many people suffered needlessly.
Yeah. At the hands of Bennet Braun, our modern-day lobotomist. He went so far as to run seminars supporting the pseudoscience that he was teaching and like how to find Satanists and all of this shit.
And this kind of, it didn't morph, but it was very much, there were a lot of like radical Christian overtones going on.
Oh yeah, the whole thing. I mean, you're weeding out Satanists.
Yeah, there was a definite agenda with this.
Yeah. Yeah, Anton LaVey came forward, the head of the Church of Satan at the time. Anton LaVey came forward and was like, dude, this isn't what we do. You're telling stories about how we're like killing children and eating their flesh. He's like, dude, we just do LSD and have sex.
Yeah, that is basically Satanists.
Right.
Just live your life, have a good time. No, honestly, Satanists are not all just LSD and sex.
It's bad.
Listen, I'm just saying.
They're not.
I'm just saying, like, chill, like, everyday people that don't want to hurt anybody,
right?
That don't want to cause harm. It's
maybe we should question things. That was the foundation of the church.
God forbid we question anything.
Right.
If we never questioned, Bennet Braun would still be doing everything that he was doing.
Including convincing one of his patients, Patricia Burgess, that she was a high priestess in a cult and that she had taken part in over 2,000 child sacrifices. Can you imagine if somebody told you that, and he's a professional, and you're going to this person because you are, having you're in a bad place.
Yeah.
You're having issues with your life, and you're just trying to get answers. And these are the answers that he gives you. Can you imagine how fucked up that leaves you?
Put yourself there for a second.
Yes.
And think about what you would do if somebody said that to you. How do you manipulate somebody like that from the jump? Like, that's such a bananas thing to say. Do you start small? Like, do you kind of slowly manipulate them into believing it, or?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's the thing, is that it's kind of insidious. You are a psychiatrist, so you have a couple normal appointments. You talk about things. You say, I think I want to try this regressed memory therapy.
You earn their trust.
Right. You earn their trust. You sit them down. You start asking them questions. Maybe the first session of the regressed memory, you don't even get into your wackadoo Satanist ideas. But eventually you build it there. And you already have this relationship. Plus the fact that it's a doctor, man. Like, we don't know. This is how homeopaths, all of this alternative medicine ends up being able to be considered legitimate medicine, is because people don't know. They're looking for answers. They feel like there's something wrong with them. And they're trusting you to have knowledge that they don't have. And it's manipulative, pure and simple.
If you don't know the questions to even ask, you're already screwed.
Yeah.
As somebody like me growing up, I didn't really have the background of science. I didn't have the background of questioning anything. I was actually told that questioning was probably not a good thing, like be nice and be quiet, and it's kind of like that sweet, what is that?
That's the Mormonism. Keep sweet, pray and obey.
Pray and obey. Yeah. It wasn't quite that, it wasn't that bad for me, but I was a bit of a shithead too. But, and I was allowed to be a shithead, which is, I'm very grateful for that. But I think that you either grow up in a house of science or you don't.
Yeah. And
I don't think there's a huge middle ground. You either have parents, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and you know what's funny is that that's not necessarily religious or not. Because there are also plenty of people who are non-religious, are either atheists or spiritual or whatever, who are completely off base in their scientific beliefs. And they are exactly the same as the people who are fundamentalist, religious, and hold these kind of beliefs. These Satan worshipping, regressed memory, all of this shit.
Well, they don't believe those things necessarily. You're just saying like the thought process is the same.
The thought process is the same. In the Venn diagram, right?
I see.
There's circles. Yeah. There's circles overlap when it comes to, I am going to have somebody do Reiki on me, and I'm going to have a priest exorcise a demon from me. It's kind of the same thing.
They're cut from the same cloth, for sure.
Totally.
For sure. There are extremes as well. It's not black and white in any way, and you cannot paint a broad brushstroke about any human being. That's all.
In our story, Patricia Burgess, the unfortunate woman who was convinced that she was part of 2,000 child sacrifices. Also, how the hell are you missing 2,000 children? Just like, wouldn't you know that? Anyway.
I think that was her conclusion at the end.
Yeah. But so she and her children were sent to a mental health facility where they were kept for nearly 3 years, heavily medicated, and with limited access to the outside world. Braun also convinced one of his other patients that she had been raped and forced her to have a motherfucking abortion because he convinced her that the child she was pregnant with was illegitimate.
I think this is where, when I was reading that New York Times article,
yes.
By the way, this is where we're getting some of our stuff. Our
yeah,
sources.
I'll cite that all in the show notes.
Yeah.
But yeah, shout out to the New York Times for an excellent expose on this jackass.
Yeah, that was an amazing article. And I think that was about the point where I like out loud was just like, what? And you know, I don't want children. I never really was interested in having children. Not that anybody gives a shit, but it's related to what I'm about to say, which is I don't even want children, and so I can't even imagine if you want a child, if you would like to give birth to a kid, and you're excited and like, yay, I'm gonna have a kid, and some fucking asshole convinced you to end that pregnancy. I don't know. I don't know how I would go on.
His other patients who he convinced that she was like some kind of baby factory at this satanic cult, and so he convinced her to have a tubal ligation.
Oh my God.
So she could not have any more children? Yeah. Yeah.
Equally, like what the fuck?
Yeah, he's a motherfucker.
And this is this thing, this is where I keep getting back to. Every time I was reading these nightmarish anecdotes, I was like, what was your end game? Like, what were you thinking? He couldn't have believed his own bullshit because he said the most outlandish shit. I mean, I think he was just hoaxing. I don't know what was he getting off on this? Like,
maybe. Yeah. We'll never know because he's dead.
Ah.
But yeah, none of this was fucking true, dude. Like, he made all of this shit up and he implanted it in people's brains. He convinced them that it was true through this bullshit memory regression therapy, which is not science at all. It's not fucking real. In my research, I found Elizabeth Loftus, who is a psychologist at the University of California, Irvine. And she is the author of 24 books and 600 papers on memory. She is largely considered like the authority on this subject. And she said, you can plant entire events in the minds of otherwise ordinary, healthy people. The emotion is no guarantee that you are dealing with an authentic memory. In short, what she says is that memories are malleable. Just because a memory is traumatic does not mean that it's accurate. One of the worst parts of Braun's failed practice, you can trace it, and it forms the basis for the religious uprising that in the 80s that saw Reagan take the presidency. And it also laid the groundwork for other conspiracy theorist groups like QAnon and Pizzagate. This whole notion is still, it's just a rehash of all of the shit that he was spewing back in the 80s.
It's very much a good versus evil mentality. Yes. And it's something that the white supremacist, Christian, Christo-fascist side of this country would really want to latch onto. Yes. Because it has a lot of those old school medieval, I'm a good guy, you're a bad guy.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's kind of just fucking rehashing the witches of the Salem witch trials, right? Like, Satan is in our midst. The fuck? So in 1993, Patricia Burgess, the woman who he committed to a mental health facility, she sued him. And his insurance, because, you have to carry insurance as a medical practitioner. So his insurance settled for $10.6 million.
Hell yeah.
And then he sued them for settling without his permission because he's a fuckwad.
Oh, do we need your permission?
Yeah, go fuck yourself.
Oh, go fuck yourself. But that money probably went... Did the insurance company pay that? He didn't have to pay that, right?
The insurance company probably paid it.
That makes me so mad.
Yeah.
Ugh.
However, by the mid-90s, once people had started to actually investigate these claims, especially the claims of the ritualistic satanic abuse and all of that stuff, Braun and his colleagues were really starting to come under fire, and their practices were starting to be called into question. So Braun lost his license in Illinois in 1997, I believe. But then he moved to Montana, it was 1999. He lost his license. But then he moved to Montana, and he got a new license there because apparently in Montana, it doesn't really fucking matter. If you're like a sentient block of cheese, you can get a medical license there. It doesn't matter.
Hey now, don't besmirch the great state of Montana. That's where Chuck Tingle's from.
Is that true though?
I would want to believe it.
The character of Chuck Tingle is from Montana, from Billings, Montana.
I think he's really from Montana.
I would love to know what Chuck Tingle thinks of Bennet Braun and the fact that his state appointed Bennet Braun as a actual medical doctor there.
I think Chuck Tingle would be very upset about this. But I think there are plenty of good doctors in Montana,
I shouldn't say anything bad about Montana, except for the fact that the board allowed this motherfucker to practice medicine there. And they really shouldn't have. They really should have looked at the facts in front of them. But whatever.
Let's get mad at the people who gave him his license. Yes, I agree.
5 years later, he got sued again by a former patient who he had convinced that she'd been in a cult, the way he did. Surprise, surprise, she wasn't. She found out she wasn't. She sued him. And that lawsuit got settled for $7.5 million. By 2019, another patient sued him for overprescribing medication and filed a complaint with the Montana Board of Medical Examiners because this motherfucker should not have even been practicing medicine anywhere. Anywhere.
Nowhere.
And so finally, Montana caught up and suspended his license in 2021.
It took until 2021.
2021. He was actually able to renew his license in 2018.
Was this with Montana or was this?
With Montana.
Oh, man. Come on, Montana Board of Medical. What's your name?
Oh, Board of Medical Examiners.
Come on, guys.
Yeah. Get your shit together.
Get your shit together. Yeah. This guy, it was everywhere. We knew what he did. We knew who he was.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we knew Illinois knew by 1999. They revoked his license.
This is just all over the news, too. It's not like...
Yeah, and there was a whole boatload of research into memory that was done between the 1980s and the 2020s.
I just don't have words for this.
Yeah. So ultimately, Braun moved to Florida. And while in Florida, he fell down and died.
Okay.
So fuck him. I don't want to co-op the phrase, but since we also talked about John Oliver a little bit already, John Oliver invented the phrase "fuck eulogy" on the what was that podcast that he did with
the
Andy
Bugle,
Saltzman?
the Daily Bugle.
It's just the Bugle. Just the Bugle. Okay. So yeah, a little fuck eulogy to our friend Bennet Braun.
I'll nod to John Oliver and Andy Saltzman. Yes.
Rest in piss.
There you go. Is that what they said? Is that what they say?
No, that just did.
It sounds like something John Oliver would say. That's good. This is why I didn't want to end on Bennet Braun, because that's just
Well, we don't need to end on Bennet Braun.
Ooh, we're not. We got another one.
Yeah. We also we can also real briefly before we get to our final story, we can talk real briefly about the Iraqi transport minister. Apparently they're building an airport, and they are building it on the site of where he claims the Sumerians also had a spaceport. Well, he said, when the Sumerians settled here, they knew full well that the atmosphere was suitable for flying to outer space. That's what they knew when the Sumerians settled there. It was from here that the Sumerian spaceships took off toward other planets. The Sumerians were the first to discover the 12th planet. This is all what he said. The Sumerians were the first to discover the 12th planet, which was acknowledged by NASA and named Nibiru, and which completes its orbit around the sun every 3,600 years.
That's wonderful.
Not a word of that is true, except I guess that the Sumerians were there.
They were there, and that's some local pride, because the Sumerians are a really great culture. Yeah. I would be boasting about the Sumerians too. I'd probably be placing it in some truth. But anyway.
Yeah, I'd be boasting about the things that they actually did.
They were amazing. They did amazing things. I think that the transport minister is going through some stuff. I don't know what it is. I'm not going to guess. But my favorite thing about that video was watching all the men behind him keep straight faces. That was my favorite part of it. I just watched them the whole time. It was really fun.
This, by the way, that planet that he named, that Nibiru, is there's a whole, we don't need to get into it, but there's a whole mythology surrounding this planet and this 12th planet. This is Planet X. Have you ever heard about Planet X?
Yeah, I don't know much about it.
Okay, yeah. I can never take Planet X seriously because Planet X is one of the very common planets in Godzilla that the aliens come from whenever they're trying to destroy the Earth.
X-aliens.
Yeah. Everything with M base is controlled by X-Alien. That's from Godzilla Final Wars.
That's right.
Anyway, but this planet pops up every now and then. It was one of the things that people talked about way back in 2012 when we thought that the Mayans had signaled the end of the world. Mm-hmm. And, well, obviously that didn't happen because the world's still going. There's a whole conspiracy that believes that NASA is actually covering up the existence of this planet X because that's what NASA does. Everybody assumes that NASA is like covering up the existence of aliens and all of that stuff. And, So anyway, they're going to build an airport on the site of what he thinks was a spaceport, but actually was not a spaceport.
Mm-hmm. I hope that guy is okay. I feel bad.
Yeah, I hope he's okay. Who knows what he's going through, man? know.
I just hope that if I start saying crazy shit one day, someone's looking out for me.
So our final story, still continuing with a little bit of conspiracy theory. Havana Syndrome is back in the news.
Mm-hmm. It's back, baby.
What do you know about Havana Syndrome?
I was really excited when I first heard about the Havana Syndrome thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I thought that it was like this super cool new spy thing that people are doing. And I didn't want our CIA agents and other government officials being hurt, but I thought that it was an interesting new Mission Impossible-esque James Bondy kind of thing.
Maybe, kind of.
Send this weird signal out to make people sick.
It's very James Bondy.
It sounds very James Bond. So when it came into the news for the first time, I was like, this is intriguing.
Yeah.
To me, it made some sense.
Right.
Because I know that sometimes certain noises can make people sick.
Well, that you're talking about infrasound.
Yeah.
Yeah, infrasound, which is well known to have a whole host of health concerns associated with it.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. So that's where my head went, that it was this mega infrasound machine that was directly affecting these people.
Right. Basically, in 2016, there were several people working at the U.S. Embassy in Havana, Cuba, and they started experiencing some strange symptoms. They were getting headaches, they were getting vertigo, nausea, difficulty focusing, concentration issues, and sometimes they would even hear the loud, constant noises like a grinding or a buzzing. These symptoms seem to be confined to their time in the embassy. So, meaning that if they left, they felt better. Mm-hmm. Which does sound like something that would be infrasound or carbon monoxide or something like that. Mm-hmm. So there's two theories as to what might have happened. One is that the whole thing was a mass delusion. Essentially, one person started exhibiting symptoms of a migraine or something like that, and a group of people surrounding this person, due to stress and proximity, started identifying those symptoms in themselves as well. The other theory is that it is actually an unidentified weapon or device using either directed electromagnetic energy or acoustic waves, and was actually used to attack specific people at a specific time in the embassy. Now, either way, these anomalous health incidents, or what they call AHIs, are back in the news. In March, the Journal of the American Medical Association published a report where they were neuroimaging the government personnel and their families who experienced these AHIs. And that report showed no significant difference in MRI results between those who had experienced the AHIs, or Havana Syndrome, and those who hadn't. And now, at first glance, that sounds like it's kind of a death blow to the whole Havana Syndrome idea, right? Neurologist and skeptic Stephen Novella, who's writing in his blog Neurologica, he has some concerns about that. And he writes, while all the symptoms being presented as Havana Syndrome are non-specific, meaning that, they can't be proven. It's not like, oh, I broke my arm, right? Mm-hmm. I have a headache where you can't really, I feel nauseous. Where do you go from that, right?
Yeah.
That does not mean that they are not real. A lot of the symptoms are explainable as migraines, but that does not mean they are not triggered exogenously. In fact, that could make the claims more plausible. The pulse beam is triggering a migraine-like phenomena in the brain of the targeted individuals. Not everyone would respond to such triggers. Not all responses would be identical, and the symptoms can be chronic. So Steven Novella he's not really siding on one side or the other. He's sort of reserving judgment and saying, look, just because we did not find any differences in the brain between the people that experienced Havana Syndrome and people that don't, does not mean that they did not experience something while they were there.
Yeah.
And another critic, Dr. David Relman from Stanford, who studied the case originally back in 2016, pointed out that the new study, which is peer review, that study discounted the location-specific part of AHIs, the Havana of Havana Syndrome, if you will. You got to remember that people were experiencing this in the embassy and then feeling better when they left. So if you study them not in the embassy, they're not going to feel it. Mm-hmm. All of this gets complicated again because Relman and his results have come under fire, with Robert Bartholomew writing on Skeptic.com. Dr. Relman's cases of concern raised many questions. They were poorly defined, in small number, and not a single person was identified or further studied. So Relman probably did not do his due diligence when he was doing his initial study.
The way that I read it on Skeptic.com, it sounded like it started from one individual, nameless person.
Yes.
And then it blossomed from there.
Right. And that seems to be what it was. And the big question is that because obviously someone had to be hit by the weapon first? Mm-hmm. Or is it that this person experienced this, started complaining about it, and then a bunch of other people who were in the embassy with them, because the symptoms were non-specific, were sitting around and saying, oh, you know what? I think I have a headache too. Oh, I feel kind of nauseated too. Mm-hmm.
It all could have been psychosomatic from the very beginning. Like,
totally.
This person could have been going through something personal. Yeah.
They were under a lot of stress. I mean, they're Americans at an embassy in Cuba. Mm-hmm. You know, this whole thing jumped out at me. To me, it bears more than a passing resemblance to one of the strangest stories in Fortean lore, the Mad Gasser of Mattoon. At some point, I want to do a full series on this incident because it's like one of the cornerstones of mass hysteria and delusion, and so worth talking about. But I think we should gloss over it real quick here because it's just such a cool story. Mm-hmm. Do you know anything about this?
Yeah, I knew about it a lot in the past, but I forgot a lot about it.
Okay. So in the late summer of 1944, there was this tiny town, Mattoon, Illinois, and they suffered a wave of really unusual attacks, perpetrated apparently by an unknown assailant who filled residents' homes with a sweet-smelling gas. The attacks continued for 2 weeks and involved over a dozen residences, houses being filled with gas. So,
I mean, yeah.
It's all right. There's jokes to be made.
There's jokes to be made. I mean, yeah.
So the victims would smell this like sickly sweet odor, mm-hmm. and it would make them physically sick to the point of vomiting. Some even reported a partial paralysis, like being unable to feel their legs or feeling like they had just experienced an electrical shock. And some people reported burning sensations of their lips and throat and facial swelling or even bleeding gums.
These are some severe symptoms.
They are. And all of this quickly spun out of police control, with reports starting to include prowlers hiding outside the windows and piping the gas into homes. People were seeing people walk down the street and use, the old, they were like the pipes with the little compartment on the bottom, and it had the flute, and you would like pump it into to spray insect repellent or something like that. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Yeah, people were like on the lookout for somebody doing that into your house and reporting it.
Wow.
Yeah. Now, despite the police's best efforts, no one was ever caught and there was no motive ever uncovered. Mm. So the gasser, if it was a real person, they never took anything of value, and they never tried to get inside the houses as if they were going to attack the people or anything like that. Mm. Very, very weird. So it's just somebody walking around spraying gas into your house. By the middle of September, the attacks disappeared. This is about 2 weeks after the initial attack. And the police ended up declaring the whole thing mass hysteria because obviously they couldn't find any evidence, right?
Yeah.
And this whole incident is now like the subject of many psychologists studying mass hysteria. They love to talk about this. And people point to the initial headline as an inciting incident. And this is kind of where the Havana Syndrome comes into question as well. See, the Mattoon Journal-Gazette had written this headline when the first incident happened. Miss Kearney and daughter, first victims. But that's weird language. First victims.
Ooh, yeah.
Right? Because it implies that there's going to be more.
It's the journalist.
I mean, maybe. But it's like the First World War happens, and you're like, oh, well, yeah, that really was quite the First World War.
That was one First World War. Yep.
So what it did is it primed the town to kind of be on the lookout for additional attacks from the gasser. In 2003, we're talking 60 years later, Scott Maruna, who's a chemistry teacher, published an exhaustively researched book called The Mad Gasser of Mattoon, Dispelling the Hysteria. And Maruna claims that the gasser existed initially, was a real person.
Wow.
And he pointed to a town outsider named Farley Llewellyn, who town rumors claimed was gay, or at least not straight. Llewellyn owned a home chemistry set. You know, you used to be able to get those, like,
oh yeah, man,
the old style, and you would set up the test tubes and do all kinds of experiments.
Blow the whole house with that.
Well,
yeah.
It's funny that you say that. He accidentally set off an explosion in his makeshift laboratory.
Oh no!
And he set it off a week prior to the first gassing. Not intentionally, it just happened, and neighbors reported that there was smoke coming out of the house.
Okay.
Now, Maruna believes that Llewellyn created nitromethane for the attack. And the reason that he believes that is nitromethane has a sweet scent, and it causes nausea, vomiting, distal anesthesia, essentially like losing control of your limbs, breathing difficulty, and respiratory tract burning.
Damn.
And nitromethane is highly combustible, which would explain the explosion a week prior. And the kicker is that it has a relatively high evaporation rate, which explains why the attacks ended after 2 weeks, because his supply ran out. It actually evaporated away.
So is the implication that he did this to these women on purpose?
The implication is that he did the first one, maybe the first 2 or 3, and then it spiraled out of control because the newspapers had said, oh, first attack.
Huh, why would he hurt people, though?
Well, that's one of the big question marks that, and one of the concerns that people have raised with Maruna's research is what's the motive? Is it just that, you know, he was kind of ostracized from the town because he was gay?
Yeah, I was kind of like wondering why his, you know, sexual leanings play into this story at all. But I guess if he felt ostracized for that, then
that's
okay.
Maruna's idea.
That's a lot of
it's a lot of speculation. It's a lot of speculation. Yeah. I don't know if that's actually what happened or not. Mm-hmm. That is a theory. Interestingly enough, Robert Bartholomew, who had studied Havana Syndrome, also studied the Mattoon gasser. Mm-hmm. He noted the use of mustard gas in the First and Second War. We're talking 1944 that this happened. So you have a whole population who's just gotten home from military service, and they're very much primed to be on the lookout for dangerous gases.
Mm-hmm. Or it's just winding down around that. Yeah.
Right. If that's true, it's possible that Llewellyn was responsible for the initial attack, and then the community fell into this mass hysteria. Whether that's true of Havana Syndrome, that remains to be seen.
Or I guess Llewellyn could have just been an easy target, because I mean, if everybody had these chemistry sets or was playing with these chemistry sets, who knows it? Who's to say that it wasn't just some other teenage kid that was having a blast, like making, like literally,
could have been, yeah.
You know, having fun
and
pranking people, like a bunch of kids, like, you know, you just can't like say.
Yeah. What's interesting to me about Havana Syndrome is that we're now talking about 8 years that have gone by. Mm-hmm. And in those intervening 8 years, no one has come forward to claim that this has happened, that they were responsible for it.
Would they ever want to do that?
I don't know.
Some people do like to take credit.
Yeah.
Some people enjoy that.
Regardless, after 8 years, the U.S. continues to call foreign adversary involvement in Havana Syndrome, quote, very unlikely.
Okay.
Despite this, there's still the possibility that it could be a weapon of some kind.
Mm-hmm. I think it's psychosomatic.
I think it's probably psychosomatic, too. I think that the big question is that inciting incident. Did they get food poisoning? Mm-hmm. You know, was it something like that and then it spread? Mm-hmm. You know, was it nothing at all and it was just a bunch of people who were stressed out and overworked? It seems like that's the more likely scenario.
I think so, yeah. And they're kind of in a place that they probably weren't all that familiar with. And
right.
Like, I think I read that they confused that sound, that like crazy
the grinding
sound.
Humming sound, yeah.
Those were actually the crickets.
Oh, interesting. I didn't hear that.
Yeah. The sound is exactly the same as the native crickets that are very loud around that area.
That's fascinating.
So, I mean, I think, you know, you're in a place that you're not comfortable with and your fears are heightened. And
your brain kind of goes, right?
Yeah, it does.
Yeah. There is something to a group of people experiencing the same thing and the community that forms through that.
Yes.
And you can sort of lean on each other with it and identify with each other, which is something that you would want to do in a foreign situation where you feel out of place, especially if you feel out of place and you feel ill, and then you're like, oh, I had that same symptom. Oh, I had that too. And then it spirals.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is a very separate thing, but it makes me think of like, what do you think was the name of the bond that happened between people that like perpetrated the Salem witch trials?
Yeah.
What kind of fucked up friendship did they have?
Oh, as they were running around like murdering people.
As they were running around, you know, throwing people in jail and hanging them and
I mean, I think of that very much like a thin blue line kind of thing, for sure. Yeah.
Like there's a bond that cannot be broken easily.
Because there has to be in all of that, oh man, we should really do something on Salem witch trials at some point. But there has to be a moment for some of those people that you're like, I think this is wrong.
Yes.
You know, like I bought it for this one, but I don't buy it for this one. But we have to do this because justice needs to prevail or something like that.
Right.
And that's really fucked up. And that's a fucked up thing for you to deal with. And it's certainly easier when there's somebody else with you and you can commiserate together and say, you know, I think this might be wrong, but...
Yeah, or you're afraid to speak up because everybody around you could be pointing the finger at you very soon if you said anything. Yeah.
So when this episode comes out, you are just about to wrap the final Sloss Furnace episode. This episode will come out, then Sloss Furnace, then we're going to move to something else. Something's going to be really, really cool for our next series. So stick around. As always, thank you to all of our supporters, our listeners. We love you guys. Thank you so much for sticking with us and continuing to listen. I love doing this. So.
Yeah, thank you guys so much.
Any news items that come across your plate that you think would be really cool for us to cover, feel free to email them over to us, slayingmonsterspodcast@gmail.com. Anything that we got right or wrong that you want to tell us about, slayingmonsterspodcast@gmail.com. And certainly also any personal like stories or experiences or anything like that, let us know. You know, I'd love to read some of your own personal encounters with ghosts and aliens and all of that good stuff.
Yeah, we will read them without judgment.
No judgment. If you send us a story, we will read it. We will not judge. I will not be here and try to fucking armchair skeptic into any of that. Nope.
I mean, we've all had our encounters that are kind of unexplainable, and you know.
Yep.
That's what's fun.
Yep.
Makes life interesting.
So, all right. Well, until next time, be safe out there.
Be safe. Thanks for listening.
Bye. Thanks for listening to Slaying Monsters, the Paranormal History Podcast. If you like the podcast, there's a couple ways to show your support. You can tell your friends, you can leave us a rating and review on your podcast platform, or you can head over to slayingmonsterspodcast.com and click on the Support Us button to leave a donation. For questions, suggestions, and other feedback, reach out to us, slayingmonsterspodcast@gmail.com, and stay up to date by following us on Instagram @slayingmonsterspodcast. Your support helps us grow, and we are truly grateful to have our listeners and community.